Hello friend, welcome to my channel. So today we're going to talk about the MuleSoft API Visualizer. Let's get right into it. So now we've just logged into our Anypoint platform and we're looking around to see all the different products that are available. And as you can see, there are quite few new products, but the one we're interested in is our API Visualizer. So now I'm into the API Visualizer view. As you can see, it's empty because I have no API configure, whether it's in production or in my sandbox environment. Sorry. So now, first thing we have to do is to go to our API manager to see how we can add new APIs. And the first thing we have to look for would be to check whether we have some API configure in the Exchange. And last time we had defined 2 different APIs that we will be using for this exercise. So let's go over to the Exchange and see what we have there. So this is my organization. I have 2 different APIs that I've already defined or implemented, and this is a create order API. As you can see, I can test it with the mocking service and a mock response. So I've defined 2 different layers here. The first layer is the process layer, the experience layer, and the process layer. So the idea is that the user will send the request to the experience layer, which is usually the user a service facade that the external clients will connect to, and then I will forward the request to the process layer. So now let's go back into Anypoint Platform Studio. As you can see, I do have my 2 implementation. These are 2 microservices. The first one is the order API, X for experience layer, and then the PR is the process layer. So my 2 implementations are ready. My API definition are also ready in the Exchange, as we have seen. So next up will be to configure our API manager. So the first thing we have to do is to jump over into our API manager view and start creating our API. So what I'm going to do is to add a new API, and I'm going to select a gateway. For this exercise, the Mule gateway will be the easier one, given that I'm using the test account, so I have no special setup to do. Now when I click next, I can select one of my API definition, right? So because this will allow me to create different instances for a specific API. So what we are actually configuring here is our proxy. Now I want to add a label to my API. Let's call this experience layer label. You can label is like static typing for your infrastructure. Think Kubernetes with labeling. Next thing you know, we are going to get our upstream URL automatically generated for us. Sorry. Then we save our API instance definition. All right. So how many instances do we have? We have the experience layer. Now that we have defined, our API instance, we will have to connect these instances with one implementation. And as you can see, the API as such, right? It's there, but it's not yet connected to a running Mule runtime. But before we get into that, let's configure the second API first. So the first one was the experience layer. This one is going to be the process layer. We're going to do the same thing. Next, and then we have our second instance configure. Now, what have we done here? We do have our process layer set up. We have the implementation URL that you can see. You have our API instance ID. It's still unregistered. Anyway, we do have two different API that we have configured instances in our API manager. So now let's go back to our implementation. If you look at the implementation in the MuleSoft Anypoint Studio, the first thing you need to do here would be to deploy the experience layer into the MuleSoft runtime. So let's just go ahead and do that. What we have here is so we are going to look at the runtime manager to see what are the actual applications are running there. It's empty. Now just right click on the implementation of our API in MuleSoft Studio. Now we deploy to Cloud Hub. This is where our MuleSoft application is going to be running. All right. Now, since we started the deployment, we are going to have to wait a couple of minutes for the packages to be pushed up to Cloud Hub. And if we take a look into our runtime view, as you can see, as the deployment is going on, we already can see that there is something that has been created and the application is getting deployed. This is a Kubernetes application. It's about to be started in the container, and we do have the possibility to look into the logs. As you can see, now it's been deployed. That's the reason why it's green, and you have the status as running, which means that we do have our connection between our API instance that we have created and the application runtime in the back end. And if we do take a look into our application Anypoint Visualizer, we can see that our experience layer is being shown. As you can see, it's in our sandbox environment. Now, what we're going to try to do next is to also deploy our process layer. And to do so, if we take a look at the API status, we can see that it's unregistered, and in our runtime manager, the only thing that we are seeing is the other API experience layer. Now, what we're trying to do now is to go into Eclipse and deploy our process layer. Of course, we do have to make sure that the auto discovery has been selected. And we do the same thing. We just right click and deploy to Cloud Hub. And we go back into the runtime manager and start monitoring the environment and waiting for the application to start. And as soon as it's going to be deployed, you can see that the red button is going to go green. Now it's green, so the app is running. Now let's go back to the application, to the API manager, and we are going to see that our application has been connected to the API instance. And if we also look into so let's go into the API manager first to see what's going on there and make sure that there's an active connection between the process layer and the runtime in the backend. Now in the visualizer, we need our process layer here is not yet updated, maybe because the tag is missing. Let's see. I think I've forgotten to add a tag to the API instance. Now let's go ahead and fix that first, since there is no update coming in. Now let's go back to our API instance and add a tag to our process layer. So what we're trying to do here is to, when we do have a tag, usually we can select our API instances based on their tagging information. Now at some point it's going to be updated, and at the moment it's still the experience layer that's showing. Let me go ahead and fix the process layer first. Alright, so now it is showing, and we do have our two API shown in our Anypoint visualizer. Next thing we need to do will be to get the connection between our different layers shown in the visualizer. And usually how we're going to do will be to send some requests to the experience layer. And since MuleSoft or our Mule runtime is how do you call it? They have an agent that will, intercept the incoming request. They will be able to figure out how the information are flowing between our different layers. So the first thing we got to do is to look for the direct connection to one of our API to send some request and see if our request is going through. And first of all, I think we should start with the outer definition of our API. Since we do have our API defined in Exchange, we can actually test the API right from inside our Exchange. And what we can do here is to select the request that you're trying to test. This is a post request. As you can see, the mock service is still active, and this is what we're trying to test first, to make sure that it's still doing what it's supposed to do. But now we have the opportunity to switch from the mocking service to the real thing, which is interesting. And in doing so, we can now send a request to our backend service to make sure that our request is actually getting there. So I am getting a 405 error message, and I don't know why. This is an HTTP error message, which has something to do with the HTTP method that I have used, and I haven't used anything special besides calling my API, which is a post request, and I've just sent the request to my backend, and no reason why I do have this issue. Now let's take a look into the logs. Everything seems fine here. No error message. Let's filter out those other errors to see what's going on. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here, so I'm going to try direct connection, which means that I'm going to skip the API gateway. Doing so, I will be able to see whether or not the error is being caused by the connection between my gateway and my backend, right? So let me start my Postman and send a call to my API using a direct connection. Of course, HTTPS is going to work, not going to work because my application is running on port 8081. Now let's use plain HTTP. I still get the same error message. But now let's take a look into the logs. And I hope that we will get some more, errors will allow us to figure out what's going on. This is the first error message that I did have because I was using HTTPS. Now I'm using HTTP and connection is refused. Why? Method get is not allowed for the path orders, which sounds crazy to me, and I have no idea what's going on. So friends, this is not something that I'm gonna be able to solve today, and we'll do another session where we're going to be able to debug this issue. Mind you, the goal of this exercise was to see the connection, an arrow going from the experience layer to the process layer. That arrow would have